Hello, everyone. I think we can start the second day of our conference, Human Freedom at the Test of AI and Neurosciences. So my name is Luca Possati. I'm one of the organizers of this conference. Let me introduce our first keynote speaker today, Professor Dominique Lambert, philosopher of science, historian of science, ethicist, expert of artificial intelligence and robotics at the University of Namur. Let me quote one of his last books, Robotique et Intelligence Artificielle. So today, Professor Lambert will talk about AI and freedom, some ideas for a debate. So thank you so much for being here, Professor. The stage is yours. Just some practicalities. We have basically 1 hour, so I would say 30-40 minutes for the talk. Then we will have a discussion, a Q&A time, and then we have a coffee break at 10. The parallel sessions will start at 10:30. And we will give more information about different rooms and organization at the end of this session. So thank you so much again for being here. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much for presentation, and thank you for the invitation here. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I want first to start with some short reflection about freedom. In fact, it is important to stress that freedom has in fact two inseparable facets, freedom and free will. This one. Okay, thanks. We are, in fact, moved by a powerful impulse, by a desire, a will that seeks our real happiness. That is to say, the adequacy with what we are deeply. This is, in fact, our deep calling, which calls us to become ourselves, to go to our mystery. This impulse is what Maurice Blondel said, the volonté voulante, a will that would be fully free from the constraints that would prevent it from attaining this end. The happiness is precisely what we call freedom. But in order to arrive at the end, we must choose the appropriate means that our reason proposes to us, the means we judge the best. And free will is in fact this ability to choose one of these means in accordance with the deliberation of our practical reason. Free will is the way in which we gradually choose partial goods, allowing us to reach happiness. These choices of goods or partial means gradually help the will to become free. That is to coincide fully with what we are in depth. By nature, could we say, using classical terms. But we have not to confuse freedom and free will, because freedom expresses what we are and is related to our deep dignity. And here and thus, we are facing here two problems related to two possible reductions. On the one hand, it is the possible reduction of freedom to free will and to a choice between only a choice between partial goods. Here, the mystery of the willing person, as Emmanuel Mounier said, is completely forgotten and transformed to a pure problem of rational choice. On the other hand, it is the second reduction consisting in identifying the judgment that is associated with free will with a purely formal and even mathematical reasoning using probability optimization, deduction in modal logic, and so on. The problem of these reductions is first that judgment of prudence, phronesis, that of the magistrate, of the decision maker in general, cannot be identified with a purely logical, deductive, algorithmic procedure. And second, that the focus on particular goods makes us completely forget the deeper purpose that moves the will and risks absolutizing some particular goods, aiming, for example, the profit of a small group, while deep happiness would imply the aim at the common good. To confuse freedom and free will, freedom and a simple possibility of rational choices is not only an epistemological problem, it is an ethical one, because here we are not respecting the deep nature of the person in the same way as when we reduce consciously the intelligence to a simple notional, formal or noetic aspect, forgotten the intuitive, common sense inspired and bodily embodied form of intelligence, the empathic one, the emotional one. Now, let us come to AR as such. The question of freedom in the context of AI can be tackled from two angles. The first one is that of individual freedom, which is susceptible to manipulations. The second angle is that of delegating our decision-making and action powers to AI systems or autonomous robots piloted by them, and which would be considered as the equivalent of autonomous agents of a system endowed with a kind of human freedom, with quotation mark. We will focus only on the first angle, but it is important, first of all, to confess that AI gives us effectively many nice opportunities. It is important to avoid technophobia and emphasize that human freedom can be served by the AIs. Freedom is ensured by security. And today, AI systems make it possible to ensure the security of communication system, of sensitive installation, and so on, in real time, but also ensures the safety of surgical gesture in medicine. But it also gives humans more freedom by relieving them of very tedious tasks of classification, research, etc., not to mention the services that AI can provide in the field of disability, restore mobility when AI controls the interface between the brain and an exoskeleton, or when AI manages character recognition in a text that a blind person would not have been able to read without it. AI has very nice opportunity and can protect and ensure freedom. But of course, at the same time, it is important now to highlight that AIs generate also possible obstacle to freedom, an important obstacle to freedom. We will limit ourselves to briefly recalling some of these obstacles, which are very well known, in fact. 10 possible threats, if you want. First one, AI with the data that we freely offer them, or in the insouciance or unconsciousness of our quick acquaintance made by the least effort, can plunge us into a society of permanent surveillance. This is the age of surveillance capitalism described by Shoshana Zuboff. And this tacitly consented surveillance leads to a channeling of our choices by incentive techniques. This is the nudging, Our will is pushed imperceptibly in certain directions dictated by commercial or social imperatives. Our freedom of choice is restricted without us noticing. We are also trapped by well-studied addiction techniques, reward, and so on, that make us pathologically dependent on applications that make us deliver more and more personal data, which in turn will restrict our freedoms and the limit of our privacy. Second threat, we are also trapped by our own conception and desire. We are trapped in digital bubbles that induce a phenomenon of social fragmentation at the heart of a network that is supposed to unite us. AIs monitor you and detect some of your preferences, political, ideological, artistic one, and will automatically offer you products or contents that correspond to them and that reinforce your desires and ideas. Little by little, you are only confronted with your world. You imprison yourself in your fantasies and in your dreams. But it is here that an in-depth reflection on freedom must come into play. Freedom is to act in coherence with what we deeply are, and not necessarily doing everything that is possible for us. However, what we think, what we want and dream, and which we express by researching a particular activity, a particular hobby, and so on, does not necessarily correspond to what would make us happy, precisely because it does not correspond to our deep natures. Third threat, the constraints on our freedom can also be seen clearly and more simply in the assistances to spell correction in our smartphone or writing in various applications of our computers. The AI automatically corrects you and suggests words and phrases that you accept to go faster, but that you might not have chosen if you had thought about it. Our creative freedom is diminished, supposedly for our good, defined, of course, externally to our will. This is a famous reduction, an implicit reduction to our freedom. Fourth threat. Let us note in passing that generative AI, such as ChatGPT, for example, can, on the one hand, increase our freedom to do something else by relieving us of tedious tasks, such as searching for references or writing administrative texts and so on. But on the other hand, they lock us into the past. Why? Because ChatGPT only knows what it has been taught, namely all the literature available now. It means the literature that belongs to the past. There is no creativity in this kind of AI, but of course some tasks don't require any creativity. But by using it, we very often become nothing more than parrots repeating the past, condemned to read what has been written, but gradually becoming unable of thinking anything else and new. It is interesting here to quote this beautiful sentence of Maurice Blondel in his thesis, L'Action, in 1893, in a chapter that touches on the question of freedom. And I quote Maurice Blondel, "Whoever is born for action, look ahead. Or if he seeks where he comes from, it is only to know better where he is going." And I underline, without ever locking himself up in the tomb of a dead past. Forward and upwards, the action is only through this, the voluntary action appears as a creation within the creation, a creation within the creation. And precisely ChatGPT generates something, but it does not create. Generativity is not creativity. It is interesting to see the link between creation and truly free will. We are no longer totally ourselves if we only repeat what the past has given us. We are no longer truly free if we are enslaved to a past knowledge without having the possibility or the courage to produce something truly different. And this is creativity and action, real action. The fifth problem is, in fact, that AI paint a digital portrait of you with information obtained thanks to a very large number of small agreements given for ease when you access a site, when you use this or that service, browsing, music, and so on. AIs paint a portrait that traps and crystallizes in the eyes of the world your personality for a more or less long time. That will be enough for you not to get a job, an insurance, or to receive constantly things that do not interest you. This reduction to a numerical profile also corresponds in the academic or business world to rankings that will serve as a judgment to exclude you from a nomination or to give arguments to a jury to oust you when there would be no deep argument to do so. It should be noted here that we are not completely free to escape these numerical evaluation and rankings, since at some job interviews it will be asked to provide them under penalty of being disqualified. But let us note that here we could have had the freedom not to offer the data to the network. In fact, we are partly responsible of this situation, unfortunately. The sixth problem. One of the important aspects of our AI restricts the freedom is the ability to disseminate information widely at very high speed. Today, maybe here, all academic talks tend to be filmed and placed more or less with your consent, exhorted on the slide after the conference. In a sense, this is important. This is important because a wider audience can hear you, and students who would not be able to afford to travel can benefit from your teaching, which they can also watch at their own pace, which is valuable when these presentations are given in languages they are not familiar with. But the disadvantage is that the larger the physical or virtual audience, it means thus the less controlled it is, the more careful you have to be. But sometimes in teaching, you have to be able to shake up audience and to risk thoughtful deviations. But as a result of the transfer, the high-speed percolation of teaching to all kinds of platforms managed and deformed by AIs leads to inhibit thought and creativity due to self-censorship. Freedom and speech can take a serious hit. Seventh problem. Another aspect concerns the restriction of freedom linked to the exclusion of people who do not have the cognitive or financial means to access to AI services. What if to access my pension file, for example, or my medical analysis results, I have to go through an authentication and security application managed by AIs and accessible only from a smartphone. How we free in the face of AI if we are in a country where access to electricity is complicated? Digital gaps diminish the freedom of a number of vulnerable citizens. AI can be a real factor of social and economical exclusion. The eighth problem or threat. Let us note a phenomenon called digital colonization, that consists of being cognitively and financially enslaved by a great powers of our nations that from afar, capture your data and guide you remotely with your consent. And of course, this does not affect poor countries. On the contrary, it is those who have access to AI who can become the most vulnerable. It is here a colonization without physical invasion, only cyber invasion. And this is a real danger today connected to AI. The ninth problem, one of the most crucial points where we perceive that AIs could be an obstacle to freedom, which is a major principle of democracy. Freedom is a basis of democracy, are those applications that will strengthen your political inclinations or those that will automatically and with malicious intention produce deep fakes, rumors, contents, or images that discredits candidates in election. The disruption of the democratic process by this kind of technique is all the more powerful because most people do not take the time to reflect and to analyze sources. It is worth noting that AI tools that help you to make your choices as voter can also infringe on your freedom. The algorithm, based on your options for or against certain things and options, can recommend this or that party to you. But this automatic recommendation is not neutral, and one may have the experience as a believer of refusing or accepting this or that ethical option concerning the dignity of person without wishing to find oneself with the members of a particular party advocating the same options in passing, but being very far from your political preference. Finally, and this is the last problem I wanted to sketch, the AI deprives us of the freedom to work in certain way convenient for us. For example, working in sphere with many human contacts. And in fact, the meaning of the work, the deep meaning of the work with all its relation dimension is in fact at risk, and we can discuss this point. Okay. Now I have just two remarks for the debate. All this allows me to raise a very important ethical problem, which is often questioned by those who, with good intentions, want to save AI from technophobes by pointing out that the AI tools are in fact neutral in themselves, and that only their application would have a determined moral charge. We disagree completely with that. Not because we are technophobic, of course, but because the only way to defend AI is to measure adequately its potential benefits and also its real potential risks. However, there are risks that do not come from AI application as such, but that exist upstreams insofar as the writing of algorithms and the big data used to train AI for example, the bias, the conscious or unconscious bias inside the algorithms. The tool is not neutral because it already carries with it an inclination towards this or that valorization or discrimination. In the 70s, there were a lot of reflections in the ethics of science around the non-neutrality of certain technologies. The idea was that certain technological tools already reflect into their design, into their very constitution, the ideological options of a type of society, and therefore of political choices, and a type of relationship between people that are not neutral. In fact, AI is not a neutral tool. It really builds and frames a type of society and relationship between people. It also implies a relationship with the environment and therefore influence on climate and on Earth resources. Choosing AI means choosing to store large amounts of data in energy-intensive clouds and dependence on rare chemical elements concentrated in certain regions. Choosing AI is not choosing a neutral technique whose application only would raise an ethical question. Thus, before any use in the development process, for example, the environment in which AI are trained can a priori induce a restriction of freedom for certain classes of users. Let us think, for example, at this case, intelligent taps that recognize the presence of ants to deliver water in an economical way. And in fact, those AIs have only been trained at the beginning on hands of white people. Or another example, the AI that prevent conditional release for certain classes of prisoners. Now, I want, after this remark, I want to say a word about the regulation. We have problem with AI restricting freedom, but how to think about a regulation. I think we have three types of possible regulation. The first type model is collectivist. Here the idea is that individual freedom does not have to be protected because what counts is the usefulness of a group, of a nation, of a given community. In this context, there is no longer this distinction between private and collective data because it is assumed that everything that can be used for the usefulness of the group takes precedence over what an individual might think or possess. This kind of perspective goes hand to hand with a monistic philosophy in Asia, China, Singapore, and so on, or a utilitarian a la Bentham philosophy in the West. A second model would be an individualistic one. We can defend the rights of the individual. The point of view is very well described and defended in France by Gérald Koenig, for example, and the starting point here is that the protection of the individual has always been a factor of emancipation. This author argues that this protection of the individual can only be conceived by imposing the choice, the individual choice, to the AIs. Thus, personal data, for example, remains the exclusive private property of the individual who can monetize or retain it, even if it is to the detriment of the group or if it is not optimal for him or others. This is a very interesting perspective, but I want to, because I have to finish, I want to propose a third model. And this third model is a common good personalistic one. Here I start from the principle that the human person cannot be defined only by characteristic quantified and calculated performance or numerical standards, but by an intrinsic dignity. But the human person cannot be considered as an isolated and self-sufficient individual. He or she is also a being of relationships with others in a society and with the natural environment. Since the beginning of its evolution, humans have been characterized by their hypersociability. What contributes to the good of the person lies both in what he or she owns, in his or her own right, but also in the goods that he or she shares with others, which as such cannot be appropriated for partisan purpose. The natural environment, the seas, the Antarctica, the Earth's atmosphere, and even the outer space environments are constantly coveted commodities, but whose defense is imposed as something not appropriable. In AI context, this means that some data that are essential for our security, for the health, for the survival of our planet, could be considered and defined by a legal instrument as common good, which must be shared. It would not be moral not to share them in some way. In this conception, innovation is not renounced, but the rights of the individual are perfectly protected by tolerating this sharing of data only for the common good, precisely the one that allows the person to achieve his or her full potential in relation to others and to the environment. On the other hand, the integral protection of personal freedoms consists in ensuring that the concern for the common good does not turn into a kind of primacy of the collective. It should be noted that a lack of regulation would amount to admitting any content on the web, but an excess of regulation would annihilate any different thought, any personal creativity. This is why I think that the dialectical relationship to the common good and to the deep goals of the individual constitute a path towards a regulation of AI that respects the person in all his dimensions. In a certain sense, this way of conceiving the protection of freedoms in the field of AI takes up what is positive in the concern for the collective. Humans can only survive by respecting the good of all, but it puts barriers to this requirement by refusing anything that could undermine human dignity and what makes people unique and singular. In fact, this common good personalism has a metaphysical ground. In fact, common good personalism rests on this deep impulse of the freedom, on the volonté voulante of Maurice Blondel, of this deep impulse of freedom of a human person, in fact, searching to reach the happiness which cannot be get without the others, without the environment, but also not without a gift, which is only be obtained from above. This common good personalism has to go in the direction of a real transcendence. I thank you very much.
So thank you so much for this beautiful speech. If you have any questions, you can come here. If you have any questions, you can come here.
Thank you very much. It is quite comprehensive and stimulating issues you bring up. But your analysis is very well taken, but later on your formulation of kind of possibility of dealing with these issues are still not clear. That is to say, what we mean by individualistic approach and personal approach. So still, as an East Asian theologian, you are really still in Western notion of individual and person. So I wonder whether in that kind of in that kind of philosophical background, can you really overcome individual and personal and collective kind of things? I might suggest Trinitarian theological discussion may be helpful this time, saying already, you have long debate on persona. So I see this is a time we need to reappreciate Trinitarian kind of idea of theology. So just, that's my thinking so far. So I really want to push you further. What do you mean by individual and personalistic approach to these issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that it is, for me, impossible to defend a personalistic point of view without referring to the collective. And it is impossible to defend a collective option without referring to the individual. In fact, what it is lacking is, in fact, a kind of deep articulation between the person and the collective. And I think Asia has really something to bring us in order to understand this kind of reality as a whole. And for example, I have not quoted Teilhard de Chardin because maybe of the limits of his oath, but in fact, Teilhard searched to reconcile in the noosphere this idea of the collective. The more united, the more you united the person, the more you have to be careful at the individual. And this sense of humanity in Teilhard's thought is very interesting. Of course, there are some limits, but the intuition is very nice, and it comes from his stay in China. He was very influenced by this, yes. And I think we have to reflect about a way to maintain the right of the individual in the collective, and to defend the collective against some over-evaluation of the person. Just an example to be concrete. I can protect my data, saying, well, I will not share to you any data about my health. But it may be very important for other person to share my data. Of course, without abuse and so on. But in order to protect the common good, I have to share some data, and legal instruments have to help us and help the society to render this sharing possible. But I think one of the problems of our Occidental philosophy is a kind of overvaluation of the individual. I'm not saying the person, because the person is not the individual. Person has this openness to this collective dimension and also to this transcendent dimension. And then I agree completely with you. We have to correct certain Occidental traditions in order not to go to a pure individualistic point of view.
Any questions?
Thank you, Dominique, for your talk. My question will be related to creativity coming from the generative artificial intelligence. I understand that data are coming from the past, sure. Nevertheless, I think that the combinations, the correlation coming from the machine can produce a kind of creativity which is different than the human creativity. When we look to generative image, for instance, images, we can see a kind of creativity. Can you speak more about that?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much for the question, because one of my colleague and friends, Yves Poulet, made me the same objection concerning the past, because in fact creativity is also based on the past, and it is not true to say simply, as I have said, that in fact we are trapped completely in the past and it is bad. No, what I mean that in fact AI has some kind of, you can say creativity, a generativity based on correlation, based on data coming from the past. But what is characteristic of the creativity is something which is completely transgressive. I have maybe one example, but this is because I am partly mathematician, but in fact, when Cantor, Georg Cantor, introduced this mathematical concept of infinity, infinity was before Cantor considered as a contradictory concept, okay? Because 1 plus infinity is infinity, then 1 equals 0, then this is a contradiction. You cannot admit. And of course, all the past tradition in mathematics and even in philosophy refuse this contradiction because logic is important and so on. And in fact, what Cantor did, he transformed a contradiction to a definition. He said, well, infinite sets are the sets whose proper parts are in fact as great as the whole. But it is not possible. This is a contradiction, no? The half of apple pie is not equivalent to the whole pie. No. Okay, it is a contradiction. But Cantor said, no, this is the definition. This is a kind of pure transgression, if you want. In the past, there is nothing about that. But of course, if you perform mathematics, you prove theorems starting from past results and so on. Then a machine can also prove theorems and suggest many very nice intuition, and you can help artistic creation with AIs, and it is wonderful. But in fact, what is specific to the human creativity is what I can call the pure or the radical transgression. And it is true also in ethics, okay? I can act in a very singular way. No, if we thought about the saints or the heroes, they gave their lives, they did acts which are completely maybe irrational, no? Completely transgressive. But this is really the point of human creativity. And I think if you remember the Deux Sources of la morale et de la religion of Henri Bergson, he said, in fact, the hero and the saints are those who open the closed morals and the closed society. This is radical transgression. But I agree completely that, in fact, there is a kind of artificial creativity. But the radical transgression cannot be obtained by artificial intelligence. Maybe because artificial intelligence is a kind of radical transgression. We say, well, we have their intelligence, and technology is a kind of radical transgression too.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much for your very interesting speech. I have a small observation and a question. The small observation concerns creativity again. It's about methodology. I mean, when we discuss and criticize, maybe like you did, the creativity of AIs, we always set a very high threshold. So you said, now, AI are not creative because they do not transgress, they do not produce some radically new thought. That's true. But how many of us do that? I don't. Not for sure. And the majority of human people don't do that. But we admit that they are intelligent, they are partially creative, they are acceptably creative. So why, only when we discuss AI, we set such a high threshold, and not when we discuss the human creativity? It's a kind of methodological problem. I'm not criticizing the fact that, of course, AIs do not transgress. I agree with you. But why such a question is relevant only when we discuss the intelligence or creativity, or like in art? And many times in newspapers we said, okay, AI can paint and produce beautiful paintings, and we say, but they are not Leonardo, they are not Michelangelo. I'm not, too.
No.
But that's not a problem. And that's the same problem when we discuss the possibility of using AI in medicine, AI for diagnosis in medical fields. Of course, these tools are not the genius of medicine. They are not Cantor. They are not, I don't know, Bernard. But they are acceptable tools, intelligent enough to do what we need. The question is a completely different thing. The question concerns distribution. You said a very interesting thing when you say the AI can produce social discriminations and problems, because the question is the access to AI. AI is a risk because a minority of people have a real access to these technologies. So the question is, how can we, I am a lawyer, so my question is about regulation. How can we deal this kind of question in order to make AI an accessible tool, or a tool that do not aggravate, do not create more discrimination than discrimination that already are in place? That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe to come directly to the second part of your intervention, I think we have to develop AI with the, being careful to the possibility to reintroduce human in the loop. For example, you have to put AI in the society. For example, your legal instrument can say, well, now we have to access to administrative files using platforms and AI systems, assisted tools and so on. But I think it's very important to avoid discrimination, to have some kind of attention to the person who are vulnerable, who are excluded. In fact, in some countries, you have services which are, in fact, which build some mediation between people and administration, and in fact, being careful to hold these persons which are excluded, not only due to economic problems, but also with cognitive problem, and I speak for me too. We are facing problem with some very complex system in the administration and so on. Then I think the solution is always to maintain human, maybe not directly in the loop, but on the loop to have some surveillance. And the first point is, it is very interesting. Your remark is very interesting because, of course, creativity, the example I gave is an exceptional creativity, of course, and I'm not Cantor, I'm not Einstein, and so on. But I think in some concrete situation, you have some example of creativity which are not exceptional, but which are nevertheless very important. For example, I am working with the Holy mission in Geneva in the conference for classical weapons, in the CCW Convention of Conventional Weapons. And we studied during many years the problem of AIs in the laws, in the lethal autonomous weapon systems. And in fact, an example of creativity, human creativity, is the following. We defend the following position. We have to reintroduce the human in the loop. We cannot delegate completely powers to kill only to machine. We have to control in a meaningful way the process. But a kind of creativity was, an example of creativity was given to me by an officer who used this system. And at a certain time, he said, well, I don't want to use the system because I consider that the relation with the human, even the enemy, is very important to protect the human dignity. I cannot protect the dignity using this machine. Then I stop the process, and I take a decision which is not helped by the machine, but which is supported by my own value. Of course, the officer said to me, well, I was in danger, but I stopped the process. I think this is a kind of creativity. I create an exceptional, I have to follow a protocol, but you can imagine example in medicine and so on, in economy. I have to follow a protocol, but at a certain moment I said, no, I refuse to follow the protocol because it goes against my own value. And I produce something which is forbidden. And let us remember this courageous act of the Colonel Petrov in the old Soviet Union, who stopped the process to launch missiles. All the data went in the direction we have to react and to launch a nuclear missile towards the United States. And he refused. He refused. And he had problems, but he refused due to reflection and due to his value. This is a kind of creativity. But as a professor, I can, for example, say, well, this student had problem with my exam, but okay, he can pass in the upper class. Why? It is not possible due to the notes, but I decided to give him the permission because I know I give him some possibility for the future. This is a kind of creativity, not the creativity of Einstein, but this is a kind of creativity. Then you're right. I have to distinguish some kind exceptional creativity at high level, and okay, it's maybe it's really nice, but it's not for us. But we can be creative in our life and exceptionally creative. Thanks.
So we have to stop the question time now, but we can continue in the coffee break. We have the coffee break